digamos que es después de la Revolución Mexicana, después de Carranza, mi tema favorito. Entonces decidí hacer un prólogo para la cartilla moral. El ideal era Reyes. Tenía afanes educativos, lo prueba desde que fue miembro del Ateneo, y además era un buen escritor. Además, tenía buena relación con el gobierno, era parte, digamos, de la Secretaría de Educación Pública, en tanto presidente del Colegio de México. Se le pidió esas páginas y Alfonso Reyes las tituló primero Lecciones de Moral. Luego le cambió el título a Cartilla, seguramente porque iba a acompañar la cartilla alfabetizadora. Está dividida en 12 pequeñas lecciones. Alfonso Reyes no habla del amor a sí mismo, del amor a los demás, del amor a la naturaleza, habla de respeto. El respeto al civismo, el respeto a los demás, el respeto a la patria, el respeto a la naturaleza, en fin. Esta edición del Colegio Nacional, además de que rescata el texto original, trae un prólogo donde hago la historia editorial y la historia política de la cartilla moral, cómo se pidió, cómo no se publicó, cómo se rechazó por el sindicato, etcétera, etcétera. También trae documentos, muchos documentos, cartas, parte del Diario de Reyes, cómo la redactó, qué tanto tiempo le dedicó. Y también trae ilustraciones, y en las ilustraciones vienen prácticamente todas las portadas de todas las ediciones que ha habido sobre la cartilla moral. Sin lugar a dudas, la del Colegio Nacional es la mejor. Es un texto escrito en el estilo del mediados del siglo XX, esto es un texto redactado en masculino. Todas estas son las limitantes históricas de la cartilla moral, pero por otro lado es muy vigente. Es importante que nos respetemos a nosotros mismos, que respetemos la verdad, que respetemos a los demás, que respetemos a la familia, que respetemos a la sociedad en general, que queramos al país, que queramos a la naturaleza. En fin, estos principios siempre serán vigentes y a nadie le hacen daño.
Olinka, la ciudad ideal del Dr. Atl, es un estudio de los diversos intentos y momentos en que Gerardo Murillo intentó crear una ciudad para artistas, científicos y filósofos en el proyecto de reunir sus capacidades y fuerzas cerebrales y acabar con la idea de Dios. Esta es una crónica de uno de los proyectos más singulares de la historia de la cultura mexicana y uno de los puntos en que se expresó la ambición del artista en su intento de definir una civilización futura por completo. Olinka tiene como su origen mi tesis de licenciatura en historia para la UNAM, pero es un libro que ha sido reescrito por completo, tanto por el hecho de que estuve pendiente de seguir investigando sobre el caso y encontrar aún más fichas del rompecabezas de esta historia, pero también por el hecho de que está completamente reescrito para tener la sensación de ser un libro en general. Es también el caso de que este pequeño volumen incluye algunos de los documentos claves de la historia de Olinka, de modo que es una fuente directa sobre el pensamiento de Atl. El Colegio Nacional lleva cierto tiempo publicando los textos y estudios sobre Atl, y ciertamente es una enorme ventaja ver el material sobre este artista reunido y localizable en una sola institución. Esta monografía me parece también arroja una luz muy peculiar sobre lo que entendemos como el campo de ejercicio de la cultura en México. Básicamente nos entrega a un artista que usualmente está totalmente definido por su supuesta relación con el paisaje mexicano, en una ambición totalmente distinta a la de el intento de una transformación metafísica.
En esta ocasión quiero referirme a un libro que acaba de publicar en su serie de opúsculos el Colegio Nacional. Se trata de la recopilación de una serie de escritos que yo hice a lo largo del tiempo sobre Octavio Paz y la arqueología. Y quiero advertir algo, en realidad era un profundo conocedor de ese mundo, a grado tal que en ocasiones él escribió sobre temas mesoamericanos o sobre aspectos de la arqueología mexicana. Yo voy a leer una pequeña parte en donde Octavio trata precisamente el significado de la pirámide. Y nos dice así nuestro autor: arquetipo arcaico, metáfora geométrica del cosmos, la pirámide mesoamericana culmina en un espacio magnético, la plataforma santuario. Es el eje del universo, el sitio en que se cruzan los 4 puntos cardinales, el centro del cuadrilátero, el fin y el principio del movimiento. Aquí, Octavio Paz está captando precisamente el significado de la pirámide. Entonces, aquí, por ejemplo, en este escrito, vemos cómo Paz, antes de que se presentaran algunos estudios sobre ese tema, él ya nos estaba dando un punto de vista, digamos, muy apegado a lo que ahora sabemos que tenía como simbolismo estas estructuras, ¿no? Él profundiza, analiza, estudia ese pasado, lo vemos plasmados en muchos de sus escritos, en muchos de sus aportes, pero inclusive en su poesía. Entonces, pues, todo eso es de lo que trata este libro que, digamos, reseñamos, platicamos acerca de la importancia de cómo un poeta, un filósofo, logró penetrar en ese mundo antiguo de la historia prehispánica.
digamos que es después de la Revolución Mexicana, después de Carranza, mi tema favorito. Entonces decidí hacer un prólogo para la cartilla moral. El ideal era Reyes. Tenía afanes educativos, lo prueba desde que fue miembro del Ateneo, y además era un buen escritor. Además, tenía buena relación con el gobierno, era parte, digamos, de la Secretaría de Educación Pública, en tanto presidente del Colegio de México. Se le pidió esas páginas y Alfonso Reyes las tituló primero Lecciones de Moral. Luego le cambió el título a Cartilla, seguramente porque iba a acompañar la cartilla alfabetizadora. Está dividida en 12 pequeñas lecciones. Alfonso Reyes no habla del amor a sí mismo, del amor a los demás, del amor a la naturaleza, habla de respeto. El respeto al civismo, el respeto a los demás, el respeto a la patria, el respeto a la naturaleza, en fin. Esta edición del Colegio Nacional, además de que rescata el texto original, trae un prólogo donde hago la historia editorial y la historia política de la cartilla moral, cómo se pidió, cómo no se publicó, cómo se rechazó por el sindicato, etcétera, etcétera. También trae documentos, muchos documentos, cartas, parte del Diario de Reyes, cómo la redactó, qué tanto tiempo le dedicó. Y también trae ilustraciones, y en las ilustraciones vienen prácticamente todas las portadas de todas las ediciones que ha habido sobre la cartilla moral. Sin lugar a dudas, la del Colegio Nacional es la mejor. Es un texto escrito en el estilo del mediados del siglo XX, esto es un texto redactado en masculino. Todas estas son las limitantes históricas de la cartilla moral, pero por otro lado es muy vigente. Es importante que nos respetemos a nosotros mismos, que respetemos la verdad, que respetemos a los demás, que respetemos a la familia, que respetemos a la sociedad en general, que queramos al país, que queramos a la naturaleza. En fin, estos principios siempre serán vigentes y a nadie le hacen daño.
Olinka, la ciudad ideal del Dr. Atl, es un estudio de los diversos intentos y momentos en que Gerardo Murillo intentó crear una ciudad para artistas, científicos y filósofos en el proyecto de reunir sus capacidades y fuerzas cerebrales y acabar con la idea de Dios. Esta es una crónica de uno de los proyectos más singulares de la historia de la cultura mexicana y uno de los puntos en que se expresó la ambición del artista en su intento de definir una civilización futura por completo. Olinka tiene como su origen mi tesis de licenciatura en historia para la UNAM, pero es un libro que ha sido reescrito por completo, tanto por el hecho de que estuve pendiente de seguir investigando sobre el caso y encontrar aún más fichas del rompecabezas de esta historia, pero también por el hecho de que está completamente reescrito para tener la sensación de ser un libro en general. Es también el caso de que este pequeño volumen incluye algunos de los documentos claves de la historia de Olinka, de modo que es una fuente directa sobre el pensamiento de Atl. El Colegio Nacional lleva cierto tiempo publicando los textos y estudios sobre Atl, y ciertamente es una enorme ventaja ver el material sobre este artista reunido y localizable en una sola institución. Esta monografía me parece también arroja una luz muy peculiar sobre lo que entendemos como el campo de ejercicio de la cultura en México. Básicamente nos entrega a un artista que usualmente está totalmente definido por su supuesta relación con el paisaje mexicano, en una ambición totalmente distinta a la del intento de una transformación metafísica.
En esta ocasión quiero referirme a un libro que acaba de publicar en su serie de opúsculos el Colegio Nacional. Se trata de la recopilación de una serie de escritos que yo hice a lo largo del tiempo sobre Octavio Paz y la arqueología. Y quiero advertir algo, en realidad era un profundo conocedor de ese mundo, a grado tal que en ocasiones él escribió sobre temas mesoamericanos o sobre aspectos de la arqueología mexicana. Yo voy a leer una pequeña parte en donde Octavio trata precisamente el significado de la pirámide. Y nos dice así nuestro autor: arquetipo arcaico, metáfora geométrica del cosmos, la pirámide mesoamericana culmina en un espacio magnético, la plataforma santuario. Es el eje del universo, el sitio en que se cruzan los 4 puntos cardinales, el centro del cuadrilátero, el fin y el principio del movimiento. Aquí, Octavio Paz está captando precisamente el significado de la pirámide. Entonces, aquí, por ejemplo, en este escrito, vemos cómo Paz, antes de que se presentaran algunos estudios sobre ese tema, él ya nos estaba dando un punto de vista, digamos, muy apegado a lo que ahora sabemos que tenía como simbolismo estas estructuras, ¿no? Él profundiza, analiza, estudia ese pasado, lo vemos plasmados en muchos de sus escritos, en muchos de sus aportes, pero inclusive en su poesía. Entonces, pues, todo eso es de lo que trata este libro que, digamos, reseñamos, platicamos acerca de la importancia de cómo un poeta, un filósofo, logró penetrar en ese mundo antiguo de la historia prehispánica.
De presentar a ustedes a la doctora Christine Schneider, quien es profesora adjunta en el Departamento de Psicología y directora asociada en el Instituto de Salud de la Universidad de Medicina y Ciencias Rosalind Franklin. Además, la doctora Schneider es la coordinadora del Consejo Asesor de Vinculación de la Universidad con la comunidad local. Ella me comenta que es un programa en el cual pues se convive con la gente de la zona, ¿verdad? Que muchos de ellos pudieran ser latinos o pertenecientes a sectores que no necesariamente cuentan con los mejores servicios de salud, etcétera. Y entonces, precisamente de esta comunicación se tiene pues, información y sugerencias, etcétera, para mejorar precisamente los servicios de salud en la comunidad, en la parte norte de Chicago. Finalmente, la doctora Schneider es codirectora de la iniciativa Bienestar, promovida por la Universidad Rosalind Franklin. La doctora Schneider obtuvo un doctorado en Psicología Clínica de la Universidad de Illinois en Chicago y su trabajo de investigación está enfocado al desarrollo de rutinas físicas innovadoras en rehabilitación. Precisamente hoy la doctora Schneider comentará con nosotros acerca de nuevas estrategias de rehabilitación física. Please, Professor Schneider.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here to talk about my research with you with the hope of facilitating collaborations between our university. I feel very honored to be here to speak with you all today. Just a warning, my Spanish is not very good, but I attempted to translate my slides for you with the help of Google Translate. So they might be off every now and again, so please just have a chuckle on my behalf if that's the case. So hopefully it's not surprising to you how important it is to engage in regular physical activity because of the numerous health benefits, both physical and mental. But if not, I wanted to spend a little bit of time trying to convince you of the importance of regular physical activity, even when you are so busy with studies. Believe me, I've been there, I can relate. There's been a ton of evidence that's accumulated over the years about how important physical activity is in disease prevention. We see a lot of great evidence on how regular physical activity can prevent the onset of diabetes. Is physical activity helpful for disease prevention? But once someone has developed a disease like diabetes, for example, physical activity can be really helpful at sort of keeping that disease at bay and stemming the onset of other micro and vascular complications that we see with diabetes. Similarly, there's an accumulation of evidence around depression, in that for mild and moderate depression, we're seeing some really nice evidence that regular physical activity, at least moderate intensity, can be helpful at improving mood symptoms in mild and major depression, which is wonderful. And all of this really contributes to the fact that regular physical activity is associated with longevity. So this is let me walk you through this slide here. What they've done here is on the x-axis reflected metabolic hours per week. And in that way, they're accounting for the intensity of physical activity. And they've translated, at the time of this study was conducted, the recommendations in the US were to accumulate 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week. And in MET hours, that translates to about 7.5 MET hours per week. And what you see here, if this is your mortality risk, that if you're getting that amount of physical activity or double that, we see a nice reduction in mortality risk. And that continues to go down the more activity that you get per week. However, there's some leveling off. So more isn't necessarily more once you get to about 40 to 75 MET hours a week. Which is nice in that you'll see benefits to physical activity if you're just meeting those bare recommendations of 150 minutes per week. What I also find so encouraging about this data is that even if you're not meeting the recommendations, so people that were doing as little as 0.1 to 7.5 MET hours a week, and 0.1, we're talking about maybe you're walking your dog for 20 minutes every day. It's not a ton of activity. you're still seeing some benefits in terms of a reduction in your mortality risk compared to not doing any leisure time physical activity at all. So hold on to that thought that any amount of physical activity is going to be better than none with respect to mortality reduction risk. And this is despite all these benefits that we've been seeing in terms of how important regular physical activity is with respect to disease prevention and longevity, and looked at 111 countries throughout the world and used that data to see how active people were being on a daily basis. And the sheer scope of this study is impressive. They had over 68 billion time points of data, physical activity data, in about 700,000 people in those 111 countries, and found that, generally we're not hitting the mark with respect to physical activity. In the US, we're getting about just under 5,000 steps per day. And with respect to steps and how it translates to the recommendations, that's less than half of that recommended amount. So when we think about steps per day that you need, it's about 10,000, which roughly translates to 150 minutes. And you all in Mexico are right there with us, just under 5,000 in terms of steps per day. So we all really need to do better in terms of increasing physical activity. So hopefully by now I've convinced you of the importance of this, and so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of my journey and how I became to be this big proponent of physical activity. And it also, actually, before I do that, sorry, I forgot my slide. I do just want to point out the fact that even 5 minutes of physical activity at this point is recommended for engaging in physical activity. So we changed our recommendations just recently in 2018 to still focus on that 150 minutes of physical activity, but also with a nod to that longevity study saying anything is going to be helpful. So, start small, you'll see some benefits. All right, so hopefully now I've convinced you. And my journey in physical activity really started before graduate school, when I was fortunate to work with Dr. Greg Colden at the University of Wisconsin on a number of different studies. And this particular one was near and dear to my heart. We were looking at a group-based physical activity intervention for women with breast cancer. And I was fortunate enough to do assessments with the women that were in our study. And there was many inspiring stories, but probably the one that struck me the most was a woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer in her 70s and had never exercised a day in her life before joining up on our study. And she was remarkable. She was all in on the physical activity intervention. For this study, they were coming in 3 times a week, engaging in at least an hour of walking on a treadmill and lifting weights. We had them do both aerobic and resistance training as part of the study, and she just took to it. She was all in on it. And by the end of the 16-week intervention, she had actually joined a gym. She was taking all sorts of different types of exercise classes. And I was just so inspired by this. I thought, here's this woman, she's 70 years old, she's going through radiation, she's dealing with fatigue and nausea, and she's able to exercise, and she's loving it. And that really inspired me to think about how we need to be more creative with getting people to be physically active. And if this woman can do it in such a challenging time in her life, certainly we can be more innovative and creative in inspiring others to engage in physical activity. And so when I started graduate school, my first experience with really being creative and innovative when it came to health behavior change interventions was with my mentor, Dr. Bonnie Spring. And we had noticed how when people engage in unhealthy behaviors, they don't tend to just have one. If someone's not eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, they're also probably eating a lot of saturated fat. And if they're not engaging in physical activity, they're probably also engaging in a lot of sedentary activity. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could design an intervention that would address multiple unhealthy behaviors at once, that would result in positive changes in other unhealthy behaviors. We wanted to see what types of interventions would sort of give us the biggest bang for our buck, excuse the expression. How much collateral changes would we see if we target 2 out of the 4 behaviors? And so in this study, we recruited participants who had all of these unhealthy behaviors and then randomly assigned them to one of 4 conditions where they were asked to make both a change in their diet, in this case, increasing their fruits and vegetables, and then also a change in activity, in this case, increasing their physical activity. We had all 4 conditions represented, so each with a different pairing of physical activity or activity and diet here, increasing fruits and vegetables and decreasing sedentary activity, decreasing saturated fat and increasing physical activity, and then of course decreasing both, decreasing saturated fat and decreasing sedentary activity. And the goal was really to see if we target 2, do we see changes in 3 or 4 or all 4? Now, at the time that we were doing this study, most of our health behavior change interventions were delivered in person, either individually or in group settings. This was just around the time when you were starting to see some web-based interventions, but there's a lot of downsides to that. It's very time-intensive for participants to have to come in and talk with someone. You also don't get really good tracking of behaviors because you're asking someone to sort of write down everything that they're doing in order to get a good sense of what is going on in their life. And I have to hand it to my advisor, Dr. Spring. She was really at the forefront of how can we make this easier for our participants to facilitate behavior change rather than making it a laborious task. And so at the time this study was done, Palm pilots, which probably most of you have never ever seen before, this is about 15 years ago, were a really cool technology. I know it's laughable to look at this now, but at the time it was really cool to sort of carry around this electronic device. And so we used Palm pilots to deliver our intervention. And so we created what we called our Mbc intervention, Make Better Choices intervention, that participants could access throughout the day. So after they ate breakfast, they could pull up the menu of food choices and search for it and input what exactly they had consumed. And they would get real-time feedback on how they were doing with the goals that they were assigned. So here, this participant was randomized to the increased fruits and vegetables, decreased physical activity condition, and so they'd see tracking of how well they were doing in terms of reaching their goal of 5 fruits and vegetable servings a day and 60 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity. And the lovely thing about this was that at the end of the day, they could upload their data to us so that the counselors could see, and actually we called them coaches, to see how well they were doing at meeting their goals. And if they weren't hitting those goals, then they could call them the next day and check in and sort of problem solve and help them do a better job the next day at meeting those goals. And what we ended up finding in this study was that there actually was a clear winner, and it was our increased fruits and vegetables and decreased sedentary activity. Not only did our participants in this condition change those behaviors, but we did see collateral changes of reductions in saturated fat intake. Unfortunately, not nice increases in physical activity, and there's probably lots of reasons why that was the case. But at least some benefit to increasing or changing those 3 behaviors. Some of our other conditions, we weren't even successful at changing 2 of the behaviors. So this was our clear winner. And what I took from this study is, wow, there really can be some potential of using technology to maybe make it a little bit easier on our participants to change these behaviors. Because I don't know if any of you all have ever tried to make a change in your behavior, like change your diet or change your activity, but it can be pretty challenging. There's not always a lot of things in our environment that make it easier. And so with this in mind, once I graduated and took my first faculty position, I thought about, well, how else could we maybe use technology to help people change behaviors, and in particular physical activity? And thinking back to my experience with the breast cancer study, that was a group-based intervention, and I really saw the potential for social support in being so critical to those women wanting to come to the group day in and day out and engage in physical activity, even if they were in the throes of chemotherapy. And so I thought, well, how could we at this time, technology had advanced by the time I finished graduate school, and social media was new on the scene. And I thought, how can we potentially harness the possibility of online social networks to increase physical activity? And I was particularly drawn to Meetup as a vehicle for delivering interventions. Meetup is an online social network, and really the goal of this type of social media is to connect individuals around a particular activity or shared interest, but not just connect them online, but also connect them in their community, so get them together. And that's what I really loved about Meetup as opposed to other types of social media like Facebook or Twitter, is this goal that let's not just create an online community, but let's create an in-person community as well. Now, Meetup groups are all over the world. We even, in over 100 countries, even have some run here right in Mexico City. This is a Spanglish improv group. If you like improv, you might want to check that out. If you need some new friends and you want some super friends, like check this Meetup group out. And for any classical music fans out there, there's a Mahler Meetup group that you can join. And so we wanted to use Meetup as a foundation for our physical activity intervention. And so the goal of this study was to see if we could use a Meetup group to increase physical activity, specifically walking, in dog owners. And to do that, we randomly assigned our dog owners to the Meetup intervention or a control condition where people received monthly emails with evidence-based information from the American Heart Association on how to increase physical activity. Our Meetup condition, in addition to getting members to walk their dogs in the community with other members, it also allowed us to share information with the dog owners on the importance of physical activity and help them problem solve any barriers that they had. Now, by now you might be thinking, why dog owners? Why are you working on dog walking? Don't they already have to walk their dogs? Aren't they getting enough physical activity? And there's a few reasons why we targeted dog owners for this particular study. One is dog owners are extremely prevalent in the US. About 68% of households own a dog. But despite the fact that you'd think that dog owners would need to regularly walk their dogs, there's evidence that only about 60% of dog owners actually meet the physical activity recommendations of 150 minutes of walking per week. And there's probably a lot of reasons for this. Not all dog owners are committed to walking their dogs. They might just sort of let them go wander around on the yard. But we saw this as really an opportunity to potentially bolster physical activity through this medium of dog walking. But probably the most compelling reason to me as to why we'd want to focus on dog owners is that people spend a ton of money on their dogs, and people are very committed to their dogs, so much so that they'll carry them around rather than actually letting the dog walk on hikes. And I thought if we can harness the sort of passion that people feel for their pets and connect that to how important it is to regularly walk your dog, that might be really great motivation for physical activity. Because unfortunately, people don't always do what's best for them. But if it's their pets and they're spending money on hot dog costumes or cheerleading costumes, then they might as well take our advice and see the benefits of walking their dog for physical activity. And this is what our Meetup group intervention looked like. So our participants would log in, and they would see the dog walks that we were posting, that they could say, yes, I'm going to attend. And we had dog walks twice a week that they could attend. And that actually came from feedback from our participants, because initially it was just once a week, and they said, no, we want more, which we took as a good sign. And then we also were able, as I mentioned before, to share information from them. So every week we posted new information about the benefits to walking your dog. We posted information on how to address barriers to dog walking. So if people had dogs that would act up and weren't great about walking on a leash, how to handle that. And a really lovely thing about being able to do this is it helped push our participants to access the website, because they knew each week there was going to be new information there. And so they could log in, get the new information, and then also see when upcoming dog walks were. And it was a 6-month intervention, and so we looked at physical activity from baseline to 6 months. This is average steps per day. And we saw a nice increase in physical activity, actually in both conditions, but nearly double in our meetup condition, with participants increasing their steps by just under 1,000 steps per day, compared to only about 400 in our control condition. And you might be thinking, well, they're not getting very much here, just over 6,000. But again, remember, every little bit helps, right? So every increase in physical activity is going to be beneficial. With respect to this idea of really building social support for physical activity, I was also really pleased to see our participants in the meetup condition report an increase in the sense of community that they felt for dog walking. So this was a scale that asked specifically about how dog-friendly do you feel the community is, how open to dogs do you feel the community is. And we saw a nice increase in the meetup condition and no such increase in our control condition. However, what I think I'm most proud of when it comes to this study is the fact that I've been able to sustain this group despite the fact that the intervention ended almost 7 years ago. So at the end of the intervention, I asked some of our participants, this has been great, we've loved having you in the intervention, would you be interested in keeping this group going and not having us be the ones setting up the dog walks? And we actually had several people say yes, they wanted to take it over, but they wanted to transition it off of Meetup, because the one downside to Meetup is that there is a fee associated with hosting a group, not for being a member, but for hosting a group. So we said, okay, that's no problem. Why don't we transition it to a Facebook group, because Facebook's groups are free to create. And they were like, that's great. And so now it's wonderful. Every week I can see that they're meeting and doing these dog walks, even though I'm in a completely different state. I'm no longer involved in getting this going. And as a researcher, I love the science, but I'm always thinking about, and particularly now after this study, what can we do to keep this going? And once I'm done I've collected all my data and we found some effect, how can we keep this going for the community members so that they'll still have the opportunity to engage in physical activity? And it was with this framework when I first came to RFUMS, Rosalind Franklin, and met with Ryan Cruz, a member of our faculty, and we were talking about, well, how can we develop some interventions for people at risk for a diabetic foot ulcer? You heard from Dr. Wu on what a challenging disease that can be, especially after a diabetic foot ulcer develops. And we really were thinking about the importance of physical activity in not contributing to an ulcer. And Dr. Wu mentioned before, about 25%, we've seen estimates around 18 to 34% of patients with diabetes are going to develop a diabetic foot ulcer at some point. And again, mostly due to that repetitive trauma that Dr. Wu mentioned before. And so you might be thinking, well, you probably wouldn't want them to be engaging in physical activity, right? If you really want to prevent a diabetic foot ulcer. But it seems like there's some really good evidence that people who ulcerate tend to already engage in lower levels of physical activity compared to those who don't ulcerate. And what seems to be really driving that is people who are engaging in sort of huge increases in physical activity one day and then no activity, and then huge increases in physical activity, what I like to think of as this roller coaster effect, where they're really putting a lot of pressure on their foot, and that's creating trauma and resulting in increased risk for a diabetic foot ulcer. And so we thought, if instead of this roller coaster, if we can just have participants basically be on the most boring ride imaginable, right? Where you're just sort of gradually over time increasing and not having these ups and downs, that you might be still getting the benefits of physical activity without the increased risk of a diabetic foot ulcer. But of course, you know, with this, and there's actually been some really good studies that have shown if you bring people into a laboratory and have them engage in regular physical activity for, 2 to 3 times a week for anywhere from 6 to 16 weeks, you can get them to gradually increase their physical activity without increasing their risk of a diabetic foot ulcer. So we're really encouraged by this. Great, we can get them to be more active. However, again, with my mindset of sustainability, that's not super sustainable. In the US, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get reimbursement for structured physical activity visits. So we thought about how can we use potentially technology to deliver a physical activity intervention in a way that's more likely to be easily disseminated and implemented. And so we thought, again, we'd turn to technology so that we could remotely track our participants using Fitbits and see how they're doing and ensure that we don't have this roller coaster of physical activity, that instead we're seeing a nice gradual increase. And in addition to that, we thought we'd pair text messaging with the intervention, again, to provide remote support and encouragement for the increases in physical activity that we see, as well as to help problem solve barriers. Now, given the risk that these participants have for developing a foot ulcer, we thought it would be a good idea to not just turn them loose with this technology and have them increase their physical activity. So we did want to bring them in for at least a few sessions to ensure that they'd safely increase their physical activity. So for this particular study, after a few screening sessions to ensure they met our eligibility criteria, in that they either had a diabetic foot ulcer in the past or were at risk for them due to extreme neuropathy, as well as they were capable of engaging in physical activity. We then met with them 4 times in person over 2 weeks. And the purpose of that was a couple of things. One, as Dr. Wu mentioned, a lot of these patients have gait abnormalities. And so we wanted our physical therapists to take a look at them while they're ambulating and see if there was any recommendations that they would provide to improve their ambulation and reduce their risk of falling as well as injury. And then we also wanted to deliver some evidence-based recommendations for evidence-based strategies for physical activity. And the purpose of this really is, it's not enough to just give people a pedometer and see a change in their behavior. People, particularly those that struggle with physical activity, need more support. And so we thought we'll have them come in and teach them these strategies that then we can reinforce when we're no longer meeting with them. So after 2 weeks, we then sort of just remotely observed their behavior with respect to monitoring their steps via the Fitbit, and then sending them text messages 2 to 3 times a week to, again, reinforce the strategies that we had taught them and provide positive reinforcement and encouragement and problem solve if they were having any challenges. And then we had a post-intervention session to sort of see how they were doing. And this was a small pilot study. We had just 11 participants of the individual level data here, as well as the average increase in steps from pre to post intervention. And you can see we get a nice increase, again around 900 steps per day, and certainly a lot of variability in terms of where people started, but generally everyone's trending up. And in addition to this, we saw a really nice change in glycemic control, such that participants from pre to post intervention on average had a 0.4% decrease in glycemic control. So certainly in order to see clinical benefit, we'd probably want to see a 0.5% change in glycemic control, but a nice, certainly trending in a nice direction, and particularly for such a short-term intervention to see a change is desirable. Now, unfortunately, not all of our patients that have diabetes are going to be successful at preventing diabetic foot ulcers. And as we saw with Dr. Wu's presentation, a lot of those patients are going to end up with a lower limb amputation. And in the US right now, there's just over 1 million people living with lower limb amputation. And the primary reason for that is vascular, as Dr. Wu also highlighted. And given the skyrocketing incidence of diabetes in the US, this is a population that's expected to dramatically increase by 2050. And so this is certainly a population that also needs to focus on being more physically active in order to get those mental and physical health benefits. But unfortunately, there's some pretty substantial barriers, as you might imagine. So once someone has an amputation, if possible, once their wound's healed, we would like to give them a prosthetic device. And once patients get that prosthesis, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to go walking and feeling confident. And unfortunately, what we see is that 65% of patients who've had an amputation and now have a prosthetic device report pretty low balance confidence. So in general, in populations, even those without an amputation, if you have balance confidence less than 80%, that's a cue, a sign that someone needs help, that's probably affecting their behavior in a number of different ways. We really should do something about that. And what we also see is when people have low balance confidence, that it's likely that in part that might be due to a fear of falling. And as you might imagine, if someone has low balance confidence and fear of falling, they're not going to be wanting to move around, right? They're probably not going to be engaging in a lot of physical activity. And that's exactly what we see in terms of the data, that balance confidence seems to directly impact physical activity. So we have how much walking you see per day on this y-axis, and their balance confidence on this y-axis, and a nice correlation between the two. And you might be thinking, well, it's pretty understandable. Maybe we just need to work on their motor skills around ambulation. It must be really challenging to walk with a prosthesis. And the unfortunate thing is that even when you teach people better strategies for ambulation when they have a prosthetic device, that doesn't necessarily translate into reductions in balance confidence. So what we see here is a pretty low relationship, low correlation between how much, if you improve their physical ability to ambulate, that doesn't seem to really translate in much improvement in their balance confidence, which suggests to me that there's something more that's going on than just, I feel unsteady on my feet. And so when Dr. Noah Rosenblatt and I were trying to think about, well, how can we help these people? It seems like you need more than just to teach them physical skills and improve their ambulation from a physical therapy perspective. We thought we could do a little bit more to maybe address this balance confidence and the fear of falling that we were seeing in these participants, in these patients. And so we designed an intervention that would actually integrate the two interventions. So for the purposes of this intervention, we've actually integrated physical therapy and cognitive strategies from cognitive behavioral therapy. For those of you that are unfamiliar with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's an evidence-based psychotherapy that's designed to address things like fear and anxiety. And so we thought it was a natural pairing for these participants who, because of their fear of falling, because of their low balance confidence, they're not being very active. And what's really cool about this intervention is it really connects to what Dr. Welsh was talking about earlier in the day, how we really need to move in a direction of more integrated care among our professions. So the intervention actually has a physical therapist and a psychologist working together in a single session to address the patient's behavior. Now, of course, given the theme that you've kind of seen in my research, you might be thinking, where's the technology? There's got to be some technology. And of course there is. And so for the physical therapy, what we've actually done is used virtual reality gaming to deliver physical therapy. And you see here one of our prosthetists playing one of the games. Can see there's this very slow moving paper that he needs to catch in this waste paper basket just by shifting his weight back and forth. And so there's a series of games, oops, I forwarded it when I didn't mean to. There's a series of games that our participants play that work on different skills, such as just weight shifting, moving side to side, back and forth. And then this is on a treadmill, you might have noticed. And so we can actually have participants walk while they're playing some of those games to increase the difficulty level. The other really nice benefit to using games to deliver the physical therapy intervention is that one of the things that we notice with participants that have low balance confidence and really have a fear of falling is that they tend to hyper-focus on their movement and on ambulation. And while you might think, well, that makes sense, that probably helps them walk better, research suggests that actually does them a disservice and that they're more likely to increase their fall risk when they're so hypervigilant about ambulation. So by playing these games, we're distracting them from their movement and not getting them to focus on how they're shifting their weight or how they're walking on the treadmill. In terms of the CBT strategies and how we integrated them into the intervention, there were several things that we did, but probably the most powerful one is that we integrated exposure therapy, again, one of those cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, into the intervention. As I mentioned before, when you have people with a fear of falling and low balance confidence, they're less likely to engage in physical activity. In a lot of ways, it makes a lot of sense. They're going to avoid the behavior that makes them fearful, that increases their anxiety. And so exposure therapy is directly designed to address that. It doesn't allow them to escape. It doesn't allow them to avoid. And the nice thing about doing it this way, where we have our physical therapist working with our psychologist to deliver the intervention, is that we can do in vivo, real world exposure, rather than just me as a psychologist using imaginal exposure for our participants and just getting him to imagine walking on an uneven surface. And so that's what's been a really lovely part of this intervention, is seeing how a physical therapist and a psychologist can really work together to address patients' needs when they have diverse needs, like problems with ambulation and an increased fear of falling. So, however, this is certainly not the norm. It's unusual, particularly in research studies, to have physical therapists and psychologists delivering an intervention together. And so we really wanted to work out the kinks of this intervention. And so we did a case participant, an African-American man who's 58 years old, who had a trans tibia amputation about 9 years ago, again, osteomyelitis secondary to diabetes. And his balance confidence at the time was 48.5, so well below that 80% threshold that I'd mentioned earlier in terms of requiring some sort of assistance. And, you know, he was decently active at baseline, certainly nowhere near the recommendations, but not too bad in terms of someone who had an amputation and was using a prosthesis. And so we took him through the intervention and just tracked how he was doing as a result of meeting with our physical therapist and our psychologist for 8 sessions. And we saw a really nice increase over time in his balance confidence. So this is that 0 to 100 scale you've seen before. Again, at baseline, he was right below 50%. And by the end of the intervention, so the 8-session intervention, he's nicely above that 80% cutoff. And what was really lovely to see is 1 month later, so this is after the intervention is over, we're still continuing to see a nice increase in his balance confidence. And thankfully, this translated also into his physical activity. So again, at baseline, pretty low, right around 5,000. He did have a slight dip around the 3rd session, mostly due to the fact he had a pretty bad illness, which kept him at home and not even going to his job. So we think that's a little bit of what that was about, but then a nice increase over time. And a huge increase in variability in the 1 month follow-up, but again, a nice upward trend in terms of his physical activity. And so we're delighted by these results, but it's just one case participant, of course. We still have a long way to go to know whether or not this intervention is going to be helpful. And we're actually in the midst right now of testing this. So Dr. Rosenblatt is the PI of this study, and we were able to get funding to conduct a randomized controlled trial where participants either get our integrated intervention or a sort of sham control condition where participants receive exercises from a physical therapist to help with stretching and flexibility, but exercises that won't necessarily address balance confidence or ambulation. And we're following them up after the 4th session and the 8th session, which translates to the 4th week and the 8th week for our control participants, and then 2 and 4 months after the intervention to see how they do. So stay tuned. Hopefully everything will go similar to our case participant, although as you might imagine, this is a pretty challenging population to work with. There's a lot of medical comorbidities, and we're finding that it can be challenging for these participants, even when they are very motivated to want to engage in physical activity and want to attend our intervention because of some of the comorbid issues. So with that, I just wanted to end by thanking my collaborators. Many have said this work could not be done without others. I've had some great mentors and collaborators in the past. And I also just want to highlight my students, 2 of which, my first 2 doctoral students are graduating in a couple of weeks, and I'm so thrilled for them, and they've been such wonderful collaborators on research. And again, in the spirit of potentially facilitating collaboration between our universities, I just wanted to highlight a couple of colleagues, because again, I was so fortunate to be able to come. I did want to highlight their work. This is Dr. Frank DiLiberto. He's one of our physical therapists at Rosalind Franklin. He's got this really cool movement analysis laboratory, does a lot of work in balance and fall risk in diabetes and foot and ankle biomechanics. And he's wonderful to collaborate with. He's collaborated with us on our diabetic foot ulcer study. And then my colleague, Dr. Rachel Greenlee, is a pediatric psychologist and does a lot of work on medication adherence and other disease self-management skills, particularly with patients who have inflammatory bowel disease. We've actually done a study to show that kids with inflammatory bowel disease tend to be less active, so we're trying to think about how can we design some physical activity interventions for them. So with that, I will close and take any questions that you might have.
Sí, muchas gracias. Y tenemos tiempo para una o dos preguntas.
How do you control for, particularly in the long studies after the intervention, how do you control for medications, many of which are known to affect balance?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we track and try and account for in our analyses, although when we're doing randomized controlled trials, the hope, right, that's right, that they're going to be equally distributed between the two conditions. But that is definitely something that we control for. I've done studies in the past with depression, where we really get concerned about people going on medications as being a confounder. And thankfully, the one study that I did with patients with depression, it was equally distributed in terms of those that went on a new medication. And what was nice to see in that particular study is we were again using physical activity to treat depression. We saw patients in our active condition actually go off medications, which was really nice to see.
So you put much emphasis in walking. How would swimming be compared with walking?
Yeah, I did talk a lot about walking, but certainly we would encourage any type of physical activity. In fact, another study that I did that I didn't talk about today, that was one of the goals, is that we exposed participants to a variety of different types of activity. Not necessarily swimming, but swimming certainly would be a good one, and we encourage people to swim. But the idea is that, particularly for some participants, it might not be feasible. They might not have a safe place to walk. They might not just like walking. It just might not be something that they are interested in. But with that particular study, we are trying to expose people to other types of physical activity to hopefully find something that they loved and that they would get some pleasure from. Because I think, I didn't talk too much about some of the theory that informs my work, but intrinsic motivation is so important with respect to physical activity. And so this idea of intrinsic motivation, meaning that you're doing something because you love it, essentially. You're getting rewards just by doing the activity. And so I think when people haven't been exposed to a variety of different types of physical activity, they might not have a good sense of what really would get them excited and what they would enjoy. And so I think the more that we can expose people to different types of activity, the better. There's actually a lot of research, sorry, I could talk about this forever. There's actually a lot of research on how when people have more variety in the types of activities that they engage in, that they tend to engage in more physical activity. So in that case, more is more.
Bueno, pues agradezcamos nuevamente a la profesora Schneider. Tengo ahora el gusto de presentar a ustedes al doctor Kwesi Buolamwini, quien es profesor y jefe del Departamento de Ciencias Farmacéuticas de la Universidad de Medicina y Ciencias Rosalind Franklin. El doctor Buolamwini es químico medicinal con experiencia tanto en síntesis como en el diseño computacional de fármacos, así como en terapéutica experimental. En el área de diseño de fármacos se especializa en la identificación y desarrollo de nuevas moléculas útiles en el tratamiento del cáncer, de infecciones virales como el SIDA y el mal de Alzheimer. Durante su labor de aproximadamente 25 años en docencia e investigación farmacéutica, el doctor Buolamwini ha recibido apoyo para sus proyectos en más de $6 millones. Y el doctor Welch ya nos mencionaba pues, que este es un aspecto muy importante, claro, para el desarrollo de cualquier investigador. El doctor Buolamwini fue el fundador y editor en jefe de la revista Current Cancer Drug Targets. Además, es coeditor de los libros Novel Anti-Cancer Drug Protocols y Novel Anti-Cancer Agents, Strategies for Discovery and Clinical Testing. Hoy el título de su conferencia es Diseño de fármacos e investigación orientada a nuevos descubrimientos. Please, professor.
Okay, good afternoon. I don't know much Spanish, but I'll say gracias to all of you. And I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to come. Thank the organizers and everybody who has supported us to come here. Okay, so my topic is drug design today. So I'm going to get right into it and just talk about some of the work that we have done. So we see a lot of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work because for drug discovery, you cannot do it solo. I mean, you have to really collaborate with others. All right, so it's moving. Oh, okay, moving is here, okay. All right, okay, so these are my disclosures. Some of these compounds have been patented and have a company that we hope we may develop some, but anyway, that is an uphill battle. Yeah, okay, so why drug discovery? I mean, I think that is the obvious, the answer is obvious to most of us, or all of us, but certainly we've got a disease burden. There are a lot of diseases that really plague us. Cancer, heart disease and cancer are the leading causes of death. Depending on how you look at it, this is the U.S. situation, but certainly it's not good for heart disease and cancer. They are leading so much. We have other diseases as well that follow. So these are like the top 10 here. They keep changing, and sometimes they change roles, but the top ones are always still at the top. So we want to attack these diseases, but the development of drugs is very costly. So this slide is showing the cost of drug development. Okay, so in terms of out of pocket, we would say about 1.4 billion. Then there are other costs that are associated with if you had invested the money and done other things and so forth. That also comes to about 1.2 billion. And overall, we get about 2.6 billion in trying to develop one drug, and it takes several years. Maybe if you are very lucky, 5 years, could go as long as 15 years before you get a drug, and you get only one drug approved out of about approximately 10,000 that you may start with. So that is a very high cost. If I remember Dr. Bridges' talk, one of those drugs was like about $350,000 a year for one patient. So I think my approach has been to try to make it as efficient as possible. I mean, so efficiency is really, really needed. And so we need to apply all of the tools that we can to make drug development more efficient. Okay, so this is just showing, I mean, the number of new drugs that come into are developed per year. Okay, so for the most part, here we are looking at new agents. Okay, so I mean, sometimes they approve a drug that contains an old agent, but these are like new agents that are really being developed. So this is from 2000 to 2014, and we have 2015 to 2018. Sorry for the typo, but that shows that we are really not bringing out a whole lot of medications. I mean, a whole lot of new compounds. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. After here, one would think that it will go up, but it came down and then even further down. Now we are kind of on the up hill again. So we hope things will continue to improve as time goes on. Okay, so drug discovery is multidisciplinary. Several fields are involved. I operate within this region, medicinal chemistry and computational molecular modeling. Those are my two areas, but even here you can see there are a lot of other fields of interest, of research that intersect in there as well. Then we have structural biology. We have chemoinformatics and bioinformatics. So we have a lot of fields, actually. I mean, this is just a few. I mean, if we continue to really expand, psychology may come in as well. Okay, so so we have a lot to think about. Yeah, I'm showing this this slide because of the importance of computational chemistry in drug development, especially recently. It's been really very useful. Sometimes you won't go and then they'll say, okay, this drug was developed by computer-aided design. There were a few examples, but overall, you see that no drug has actually been developed recently that there wasn't some computational analysis at some point. Okay, and gentlemen, John Popel and Walter Korn, they really were the pioneers in trying to develop these computer-aided, drug development and molecular interaction theories. So try to just highlight them for the importance of their work. Okay, so what I have been doing, I'll just talk about some of what we do. So there are several approaches to drug discovery. Now, first, you've got to have a lead. Okay, so a lead is like the seed that you will modify. Eventually, that lead may never probably even see clinical trials, but the compounds that will be spawned out of that will be tested further and eventually get a drug out of it. Once you have the lead, you do some SAR, structure-activity relationships, to optimize the lead in different aspects. The activity of the lead, you try to improve it. The safety of the lead, you try to improve it, as well as the drug likeness, that is whether it's going to actually get to the patients and go to the site of drug action. Those are all important factors to consider. Then it goes to preclinical trial, preclinical work, where you will work on in animals primarily. So these are animal studies. You have you do in vivo studies to really once you've done the animal studies and preclinical and convince yourself, then you are set to apply to FDA to start clinical trials. first you've got to do the safety, which is phase 1 and so forth. Now, I'm not working at that level. I'm working at these 3 levels. If you remember one of my first slides, I'm only in the discovery phase, not the clinical trials phase. Okay. Something with my arrow is not moving my slide. Okay. Okay, let me. Okay, I think I need IT here. Okay, so yeah, no, this guy. Right? There you go. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, okay, there was nothing different that I have been doing. It just worked. Okay, good. Let me see, make sure that, okay. So in those methods, what I'm showing here is structure-based design. Now in computer-aided drug design, we've got ligand-based, that is based on the compound or on a compound that you have found, and then you are trying to do SAR around it. And you can also have structure-based. Now, ligand-based, for the most part, you don't know the protein structure that it binds to or whatever receptor or target it binds to. You don't have the 3D structure. In structure-based design, you have the structure crystallized, or you have an analog of it crystallized that you can model your protein based on that as a template. So you can use these methods. You can use alone or together, whichever way will help you get your products. So we worked on these 2 oncogenes. EGFR is a tyrosine kinase, it's epidermal growth factor receptor tyrosine kinase, and it's analog, which they are quite closely related, HER2. So we looked at the compounds that had been published that could inhibit both of these tyrosine kinases. There was some similarity to them, but there were also some differences. And we wanted to find out why one would inhibit one protein and not the other, and vice versa. Okay, so we did that. We used computer-aided design. First, we got the crystal structure. This was the first crystal structure that was determined. I got the coordinates before it was put in the protein data bank from the crystallographer. And then we did some analysis of the compounds. We did some docking and made docking alignments and used a program known as comparative molecular field analysis, and then did the analysis and came out with a hypothesis that, we could actually cyclize the compound, part of the compound, and have these cyanopyridones. So we did acquire some of them and test them. They did show activity, but not to the level we want. And as we probably all know, funding dried up for that. But at least we made some inroads there. And then we also tried to do some further SAR. The first one, we were just aligning the compounds themselves. Here, without any tweaking. Here, what we did were to put the compounds in the binding site and then do some molecular dynamics to allow them to adjust themselves and then form some new alignments, which we also used to do some analysis. Then we tried to look at the 2 proteins and find out what differences are there, because each protein actually is not, we work on the X-ray structure, which is static. Now, the proteins don't exist in our bodies. We are not solids walking about. I mean, the proteins are dynamic. They move around. So we did some molecular dynamics on the two proteins to see what happens to some particular amino acids. This is the binding site, and see what happens around there. We saw that because of different amino acids, some hydrogen bond that exists over here is absent in here too, so that allows one amino acid to move into the area and cause a difference in terms of the pocket. All right, so that we found out. Okay, so that was information we have published. Then we looked at the EGFR in terms of doing what we call virtual screening. Okay, so usually experimental screening, you design an assay and then you screen your compounds. Okay, that takes time and money. You could also do virtual screening, which doesn't mean that doesn't cost anything, but comparatively, it costs much less. So we take the protein, and then we define the binding site, and then we get a library of in silico compounds and just dock through the site and see which compounds bind better or are predicted to bind. And then we acquire them, and then we test them and look at how they did in terms of inhibiting the kinase activity. So we did do that. Here we came out with a compound we call JKB7, which actually did better than the marketed drug, which is Iresa, from these in vitro data. So this is also another project that we are still thinking about reviving once the funding is right. Then we also have worked on another oncogene. So these are cancer-driving proteins. So this oncogene is MDM2, and the MDM2 suppresses P53, and P53 is a tumor suppressor. So when it is suppressed, then tumors have the freedom to pop up and then to flourish. So we, in 96, there was a crystal structure of a complex between MDM2 and P53. So we took that complex, removed the P53 peptide from it, and then did a virtual screening, dot compounds in there, and looked at some of them, which we thought were binding well. And then we came up with a set of beta-carbolines that really showed some good binding. So we tested a few more, and then we actually synthesized a bunch of them. We synthesized about 50 compounds and then tested them. We came out with this compound to be the best. We call it SP141. And so we did a SAR against, here we've got colon cancer cell line, and then these 3 pancreatic cancer cell lines. And we actually were quite enthusiastic about these compounds. We still are, because they actually have activity against pancreatic cancer. We also showed that they have activity against triple-negative breast cancer. And these are very difficult cancers to treat. So we did other tests. This is cell cycle perturbation by this compound. We found that cell cycle arrest at G2 was a prominent effect of these of this compound, and after a while you get apoptosis setting in. We saw that in normal human fibroblasts, the compound did not have the same effect as it had in cancer cells. These are for prostate cancer cells as well. So we a little mechanistic insight was that there was a very strong G2M arrest by these compounds. We did some in vivo animal work. So this first one is showing the effect of the compound on breast cancer xenograft. And we saw that, in fact, over the treatment period, the compounds really suppress breast cancer very well. The animals looked fine in terms of weight. And we also did for pancreatic cancer, and we had similar results. So we went on and did some more studies on these cancers. So we are showing here some in vivo studies with pancreatic cancer, and some of the proteins that are affected. These proteins are basically markers for apoptosis and cell killing and cell survival and so forth. And we found that they were all matching suppression of cancer growth. And then what we came, in terms of the mechanism, we found that when the compound bound MDM2, it actually caused its degradation. Okay, and that is not a very common effect to see, but that was what we concluded from it. And we also did work with some more breast cancer. This one we are trying to show metastasis going to the lungs. Okay, so breast cancer can metastasize to the lungs. So we inject through the tail vein, and then we look at the lungs, and then we see metastasis. So this is vehicle alone, and then compounds treated with mice treated with a compound. And we can see that on day 15 here, whilst we still have a lot of tumors showing in the vehicle-treated mice, we have the compound-treated mice almost losing all the cancers. So that showed quite impressive activity here as well. Now I'm going to jump to another set of proteins, nucleoside transporters. So these are membrane transporters. There are two groups of them. They transport nucleosides. Now, nucleosides, as you may know, probably the best example I'll give is adenosine. Okay, so these are used to synthesize. They can be used in salvage synthesis of RNA. If they are, you have the deoxy analogs for DNA as well. So one of my research focus areas has been nucleoside transporters. So we are trying to make inhibitors for all of these. We've got some good inhibitors for ENT1, ENT2. ENT1 is the most, the one that we have done the most on. So I'll show some studies that we have tried to inhibit ENT1 particularly to achieve some therapeutic effects. So this slide is showing some dipridamol analogs that we made that we showed that they were inhibitors of ENT1. And we wanted to see whether they can prevent cancer because we think that if we apply nucleoside transporter inhibitors, they will help to slow down the ability of cancers to make nucleic acids, and that will help in prevention. So we had an in vitro assay for cancer development with a cell line, and then we tried to plot the nucleoside transporter activity against the ability of the compounds to suppress tumor promotion. We got some trend. It's not a very strong correlation, but we thought that there's some correlation there. So we went ahead and did and tried some anti-cancer effects. Here we are showing their effect on preventing UV-induced cancer in skin, mice skin cancer, mice skin cells. So this is a prevention approach. So we treat the mice cells with UV over time, and then find out some of them become cancerous. And then we try to see whether we can use the compounds to decrease that transformation, which we were able to do. And then we did some Western blotting just to see about the mechanism, to see which proteins were involved. So STAT3 here showed some response, and also junk as well. So anyway, we moved on to an in vivo model. So that was an in vitro anti-cancer model. We went into a mouse model. Now this is a transgenic mouse model that develops breast cancer within like 1 month. That's one of the fastest transgenic breast cancer models we have. So we did the study and treated the compounds with vehicle or with dipridamol over time. And then we looked at tumor incidence, which had decreased. Then we also looked at, in that mouse model, when tumors form, they also metastasize to the lung. So we looked at the lung metastasis as well, and we found that actually there was an effect. Then we did some PCRs and gene expression analysis to see what genes were affected. We came up with 2 that we could actually do Western blot for. There were others, but if you don't have a Western blot for it, it's hard to check it out. So we did check out these KLK10 and LECT1, and we have been doing some studies to see whether we can use these as anti-tumor agents. So that is going on. Okay, then nucleoside transporters have other effects. We try to use them as, to target them as a protective mechanism for mitochondria. In HIV patients, when HIV started, AZT was used and other nucleosides were used, and the people, they got some treatment. Initially, people died very quickly. But as time went on, people lived longer, and now they can live just as long as anybody else. So mitochondria toxicity began to show up. So actually what happens is that when the cells take up the nucleoside, it kills the virus, but some also seep into the mitochondria through the nucleoside transporter or the mitochondrial membrane. And then they form triphosphates in the mitochondria and then inhibit polymerase gamma, which is involved in mitochondrial DNA synthesis. So that blocks mitochondrial DNA synthesis and causes mitochondrial depletion and results in a lot of toxicities. In fact, that has led to the cessation of use of many of those initial compounds. We call them nukes. Okay, so only a few of them are now left, just because of the mitochondrial toxicity. So here we developed a strategy to block the mitochondrial nucleoside transport by first getting a nucleoside transport inhibitor. We made it into a prodrug, so it doesn't block nucleoside transporters on the the plasma membrane, because if it did that, then even the HIV drug cannot go into the cell. But when it gets into the cell, it gets hydrolyzed, produces a inhibitor parent, which then will bind to mitochondria and inhibit the transporter and prevent the nucleoside drugs from getting into mitochondria. So we made a series of compounds and did the testing, and as these scatter plots from flow cytometry show, the compounds were actually able to rescue the mitochondria. This is vehicle, this is control, this is mitochondrial poison. We see that there's a very dramatic change in the scatter distribution. Okay, we come here, we still have a distribution with lower cells in the healthy population. And when we come to this last panel, we see that the population has increased almost to the level of the control. And then here we try to show that the compounds actually went into the cells by using a fluorescent method. Okay, so we demonstrated that by doing that, we can rescue the mitochondria. So this is a mitochondria protection strategy. We did repeated the experiments to get statistical significant results, which showed really this is the last bars show that there is a rescue. And then we also did the mitochondrial DNA levels to show that when the levels are above this red line, means it's toxic. When they are below, then there's no, that is indicating no toxicity. And anytime we combine the nucleoside, DDC is the worst culprit of all of them. We combine it with these JKB compounds, and the mitochondria inhibition of synthesis goes down. So this also supports our theory or hypothesis that we can actually protect the mitochondria. Okay, then we did some further work with the nucleoside transport inhibitors. Here we tried to make constrained analogs. Okay, this is more medicinal chemistry. People may understand this more. I mean, when you constrain something, you decrease the degrees of freedom, and so you get a more, it becomes more rigid. Okay, so we try to make these more rigid compounds and test them. One of them that we call compound 4 did very well. It did very, very, very well compared to the standard agent. Was about the same as the standard agent. So we tested this compound as a cardioprotective agent. Okay, so those familiar with heart attack, if you have a heart attack, there's automatically adenosine levels rise. And adenosine is a tissue protectant. So it helps to protect the heart from further damage. And so if you can keep adenosine levels high, it will help in that situation. But the heart has got nucleoside transporters that are in the membrane, and they suck the nucleosides into the cell. But the adenosine receptors are on the cell surface. So our approach was to block the nucleoside transporters in the cell membrane, in the plasma membrane, and keep adenosine levels high in the interstitial tissue, so I can work on the receptors to protect the heart. And we were able to actually show that we are able to recover heart function after we cause an ischemic insult. And we looked at the infarct size as well. And we could see that when we use a compound, this is compound 4 here, we are able to reduce infarct size. We then went on and did an in vivo, this was ultrasound imaging. Okay, so we did echo imaging to find out what happens during the ischemia. So this is without treatment, and this is with treatment. And the numbers here, I'm sorry you cannot see, and then there are some numbers here as well that show some distances. Depending on whether the heart is being protected or not, you have differences. And we had significant differences that showed us that we were actually making some dent. We were actually protecting the hearts. We are still working on this with the Heart Institute at Rosalind Franklin with Dr. Gazmuri. Okay, then I come back to cancer. Okay, so this is how more interdisciplinary could this be? Okay, so there's another oncogene, STAT3. There are 7 STATs. STAT3 is the most notorious regarding cancer, and we are targeting it. So one STAT has been crystallized. So we take it and then we do virtual screening. So that's what we are showing here. And then we show that some compounds bind, and then they can kill cancer. That's what these images show. And then we went ahead, and I think, yeah, okay. I think in the interest of time, I shortened it. But we have gotten some compounds that we are following up here. We actually submitted an R01 that we are following up to do a resubmission on. I collaborate with James Jackson in Hawaii, University of Hawaii, and Dr. Larry Fefe at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. Okay, then I think this is the last target, which is HIV integrase. Okay, so when HIV infects a cell, CD4 cell, first it goes in as a retrovirus, which is RNA, and that RNA is reverse transcribed into a DNA, which is the provirus DNA, and that provirus DNA is then incorporated into the DNA of the host. Once that incorporation is done, then it can replicate and then cause havoc to other cells. So what we wanted to do is to block that integration. So HIV integrase does the integration. So we modeled the agents against it. The human integrase has not been crystallized, but there's a prokaryote analog that has been crystallized, and we worked from there. So we made a hypothesis of a pharmacophore, and then we synthesized new compounds following that pharmacophore, and then tested them and continued to modify them. Eventually, we have got some amides, and we did a homology model of the formivirus DNA integrase complex. We did this modeling homology with Dr. Cheng at the National Laboratory at Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Then we did a docking. Docking is trying to, that's what we use for the virtual screening. And then we saw that there is a correlation between the binding affinity at that site of our compounds and then the activity level. And then we are continuing to develop these as well. Okay, so I think that is all I will show you, and here's the summary. An interdisciplinary collaborative drug design and discovery effort has been used. We targeted several proteins and came up with some lead compounds that could be looked into further for heart disease, cancer, as well as HIV/AIDS. Now, we have also gotten some potential genes that we could target for cancer chemoprevention. And I'll leave you with this and thank my many collaborators. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Tenemos tiempo para un par de preguntas. Gabriel, por favor.
Thanks, interesting talk. My question is, in some slides you show several Michael acceptors, such as cyanopyridines and also the salicylic derivatives. Is there any evidence of formation of covalent adducts with the kinases or even the HIV integrase?
Is there a structure, a complex with the HIV integrase? Not that I know right now, except not the inhibitors, but I was showing you the formivirus tetramer with the DNA bound. Okay, so that is what is shown. And then there's one, the very first inhibitor that is actually known. I mean, no, not known. That was known, was approved. Raltegravir. So raltegravir is one of the integrase inhibitors. That was the first one approved in 2007. Okay, they have crystallized that, but not with the human. It's with that foamy virus. In fact, when I showed that homology model that we made, it was in there as well. So they've done that crystallization, but not with human integrase that I know about. Yeah. Okay.
¿Alguna otra pregunta o comentario?
Thank you. John, this may be way pie in the sky, but it seems to me that a whole scientific section of what you do, synthetic chemistry, could be, and maybe is, and that's the question, directed towards carriers for gene therapy that are inert, that are different to the viruses we have to inactivate and other methods that we use to take a gene and deliver it to a specific organ. There should be a whole science that's growing up around that, I think, because gene therapy is going to be an issue. Do you see any sign of this?
Yeah, yes, I think that is already being tried. Some people have made lipophilic agents that they can complex with DNA and try to deliver them into cells. I mean, our pharmaceutics colleagues are working in those areas. Sometimes you help them make the compound, or some compounds are being synthesized and complexed with DNA to help deliver them into cells to target, either to target some cells or to do gene expression. Yeah.
Bueno, si no hubiera más preguntas, agradezcamos nuevamente al profesor Buolamwini. ¿Van a mover algo? Así está.
¿Viene ahorita un descanso o no?
No pasamos directamente, porque sabes que hay otro evento. Pues mira, digamos, ¿qué te parece a las 6:15, o sea, unos 25 minutos? ¿Te parece bien? Sí, es que yo no sabía, pero programaron otro evento. Tengo ahora el gran gusto de presentar a ustedes, aunque muchos de ustedes ya lo conocen bien, al doctor Héctor Rasgado Flores, quien estudió medicina en la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México y estudió también o simultáneamente piano y composición en la Escuela Nacional de Música, así como en el Centro de Investigación y Estudios de la Música y la Royal School of Music. Hizo su doctorado en neurociencias en el Centro de Investigación y de Estudios Avanzados, el CIMBESTAB, y en la Universidad de Maryland. Su vida ha sido un balance entre la investigación científica, la interpretación y composición musical, la educación, la política científica, la promoción de la ciencia en Latinoamérica y de la educación de estudiantes latinos en Estados Unidos. El doctor Rasgado es actualmente profesor de Fisiología y Biofísica en la Universidad Médica y de Ciencias Rosalind Franklin en Chicago, donde es además director del programa de Diversidad, Superación y Éxito. Además de ser coorganizador de este simposio, hoy cerraremos este evento con la interpretación de un fragmento de la suite de los elementos, obra musical de la autoría del maestro Rasgado. Por favor.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Ha sido un gran privilegio para mí el ser parte de este grupo de la Universidad Rosalind Franklin. Yo estoy muy orgulloso de mis colegas. Yo creo que ustedes están muy impresionados del trabajo que han escuchado de ellos. Y lo que voy a tocar para ustedes es, en realidad, el producto de una obra que el doctor Juaristi me invitó a colaborar con él, y es una interpretación musical de los elementos químicos. Tenemos 14 elementos y el Colegio Nacional publicó una obra sobre ellos. Tiene una descripción que hace el doctor Juaristi de los elementos químicos. Luego viene una descripción de mi parte de cómo me inspiré para escribir sobre elementos químicos. Luego vienen todas las partituras y finalmente viene un compact disc de la obra. No vamos a tener tiempo de interpretar todos, pero voy a estar echando un ojo a ver a qué tan lejos llegamos. Y nada más quisiera decirles que para inspirarme cómo componer las obras musicales, estuve pensando cómo voy a pensar en el hidrógeno para componer algo sobre el hidrógeno, por ejemplo. Entonces me di cuenta, bueno, me recuerda a mi hija, Marisa, entonces ya estaba la cosa fácil. Y así lo hice pensando en todos los elementos que escogí, y veo que hay aquí 3 personas a las cuales pensé en ellos al hacer los elementos: el doctor Bridges, que pensé en el titanio porque él es muy fuerte; el doctor Juaristi en el oro por su brillantez; y mi mamá, que está por allá sentada, pensando en el magnesio, que nos protege, ¿no? Y muy importante también, Said Vázquez Ortega, de la universidad, que está aquí presente. Ella hizo un video que acompaña a la suite, que es el que ustedes van a estar viendo en la pantalla. Si hay algún estudiante de química aquí en la audiencia. Sí, dice, ven para acá, por favor. ¿Sí? Vengan. Sí. Los estudiantes de química vengan. Y si hay, a ver cuántos son. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ok, muy bien. Y si hay, pasen para acá, sí, por favor. Y si hay unos estudiantes de música, que estudian música también. ¿No hay? Bueno, ok, muy bien, está bien así.
Bueno, pues como ven o han escuchado, esta obra musical del maestro Rasgado pues tiene todas las credenciales, toda la calidad para hacerse verdaderamente emblemática de la química, de los químicos. Creo que en México lo estamos logrando, o sea, este libro con CD, ¿verdad? Y las partituras de la música del maestro Rasgado cada vez tiene más aceptación, ¿verdad? Más solicitado. También el doctor Rasgado está siendo invitado pues cada vez más frecuentemente, de lo que yo veo, ¿verdad? A eventos, diversas actividades en México, el Congreso de la Sociedad Química de México próximamente en Puebla, en fin. Entonces, pues ahora lo que necesitamos es pues hacerlo también a nivel internacional. Entonces vamos a necesitar una coedición de la Universidad Rosalind Franklin, ¿verdad? Pero en realidad, pues aprovechando el Año Internacional de la Tabla Periódica, estamos haciendo lo posible para que tenga también visibilidad en diversos eventos, por ejemplo, de la UPAC. Y bueno, pues thank you, Héctor, for your friendship and for your generosity. I also want to express my gratitude to our new friends from Rosalind Franklin University, Professor Welch, Christine, Stephanie, Beth, John, and Robert. Thank you so much for your presence here. And you are welcome in Mexico anytime you want to come again. Para los demás, pues los esperamos próximamente en algún otro evento del Colegio Nacional. Muchas gracias por haber estado aquí y pues estamos a sus órdenes. A nombre del Colegio Nacional. Gracias.
Digamos que es después de la Revolución Mexicana, después de Carranza, mi tema favorito. Entonces decidí hacer un prólogo para la cartilla moral. El ideal era Reyes, tenía afanes educativos, lo prueba desde que fue miembro del Ateneo, y además era un buen escritor. Además, tenía buena relación con el gobierno, era parte, digamos, de la Secretaría de Educación Pública, en tanto presidente del Colegio de México. Se le pidió esas páginas de Alfonso Reyes, las tituló primero Lecciones de Moral. Luego le cambió el título a Cartilla, seguramente porque iba a acompañar la cartilla alfabetizadora. Está dividida en 12 pequeñas lecciones. Alfonso Reyes no habla del amor a sí mismo, del amor a los demás, del amor a la naturaleza, habla de respeto. El respeto al civismo, el respeto a los demás, el respeto a la patria, el respeto a la naturaleza, en fin. Esta edición del Colegio Nacional, además de que rescata el texto original, trae un prólogo donde hago la historia editorial y la historia política de la cartilla moral, cómo se pidió, cómo no se publicó, cómo se rechazó por el sindicato, etcétera, etcétera. También trae documentos, muchos documentos, cartas, parte del Diario de Reyes, cómo la redactó, qué tanto tiempo le dedicó. Y también trae ilustraciones, y en las ilustraciones vienen prácticamente todas las portadas de todas las ediciones que ha habido sobre la cartilla moral. Sin lugar a dudas, la del Colegio Nacional es la mejor. Es un texto escrito en el estilo del mediados del siglo XX, esto es un texto redactado en masculino. Todas estas son las limitantes históricas de la cartilla moral, pero por otro lado es muy vigente. Es importante que nos respetemos a nosotros mismos, que respetemos la verdad, que respetemos a los demás, que respetemos a la familia, que respetemos a la sociedad en general, que queramos al país, que queramos a la naturaleza. En fin, estos principios siempre serán vigentes y a nadie le hacen daño.
Olinka, la ciudad ideal del Dr. Atl, es un estudio de los diversos intentos y momentos en que Gerardo Murillo intentó crear una ciudad para artistas, científicos y filósofos en el proyecto de reunir sus capacidades y fuerzas cerebrales y acabar con la idea de Dios. Esta es una crónica de uno de los proyectos más singulares de la historia de la cultura mexicana y uno de los puntos en que se expresó la ambición del artista en su intento de definir una civilización futura por completo. Olinka tiene como su origen mi tesis de licenciatura en historia para la UNAM, pero es un libro que ha sido reescrito por completo, tanto por el hecho de que estuve pendiente de seguir investigando sobre el caso y encontrar aún más fichas del rompecabezas de esta historia, pero también por el hecho de que está completamente reescrito para tener la sensación de ser un libro en general. Es también el caso de que este pequeño volumen incluye algunos de los documentos claves de la historia de Olinka, de modo que es una fuente directa sobre el pensamiento de Atl. El Colegio Nacional lleva cierto tiempo publicando los textos y estudios sobre Atl, y ciertamente es una enorme ventaja ver el material sobre este artista reunido y localizable en una sola institución. Esta monografía me parece también arroja una luz muy peculiar sobre lo que entendemos como el campo de ejercicio de la cultura en México. Básicamente nos entrega a un artista que usualmente está totalmente definido por su supuesta relación con el paisaje mexicano, en una ambición totalmente distinta a la del intento de una transformación metafísica.
En esta ocasión quiero referirme a un libro que acaba de publicar en su serie de opúsculos el Colegio Nacional. Se trata de la recopilación de una serie de escritos que yo hice a lo largo del tiempo sobre Octavio Paz y la arqueología. Y quiero advertir algo, en realidad era un profundo conocedor de ese mundo, a grado tal que en ocasiones él escribió sobre temas mesoamericanos o sobre aspectos de la arqueología mexicana. Yo voy a leer una pequeña parte en donde Octavio trata precisamente el significado de la pirámide. Y nos dice así nuestro autor: arquetipo arcaico, metáfora geométrica del cosmos, la pirámide mesoamericana culmina en un espacio magnético, la plataforma santuario. Es el eje del universo, el sitio en que se cruzan los 4 puntos cardinales, el centro del cuadrilátero, el fin y el principio del movimiento. Aquí, Octavio Paz está captando precisamente el significado de la pirámide. Entonces, aquí, por ejemplo, en este escrito, vemos cómo Paz, antes de que se presentaran algunos estudios sobre ese tema, él ya nos estaba dando un punto de vista, digamos, muy apegado a lo que ahora sabemos que tenía como simbolismo estas estructuras, ¿no? Él profundiza, analiza, estudia ese pasado, lo vemos plasmados en muchos de sus escritos, en muchos de sus aportes, pero inclusive en su poesía. Entonces, pues, todo eso es de lo que trata este libro que, digamos, reseñamos, platicamos acerca de la importancia de cómo un poeta, un filósofo, logró penetrar en ese mundo antiguo de la historia prehispánica.